Listen closely, my children, for this is the story of how the sky first learned to weep, and the earth drank its fill.
They say in our land that the ancestors never sleep. They watch from the baobab trees, they whisper through the harmattan wind, they test the hearts of men when the dust settles and the moon rises full. But Kofi had begun to wonder if they were watching him at all. 10 years. 10 years of planting seeds in soil that refused to yield. 10 years of prayers whispered at the ancestral shrine while his neighbors laughed and grew fat on stolen wealth. 10 years of watching others abandon the old ways, turning to sangomas who dealt with spirits that demanded blood instead of respect. That morning, Kofi knelt before the small shrine in his compound, the clay pots of his ancestors cracked and dusty. His hands trembled as he poured the last of his palm wine onto the red earth. Nananam, he whispered, using the old word for the revered dead. I have honored you. Even when my children cried for food. Even when my wife's eyes grew hollow with hunger. I have kept the festivals. I have poured libations. I have remembered. From across the compound wall, laughter erupted. Kwame, his neighbor, stood with 3 other men, their wrists heavy with gold, their bellies round with plenty. Still talking to the dust, Kofi? Kwame called out, his voice thick with mockery. While you starve for ghosts, we feast with the living. The other men joined in, their laughter sharp as broken pottery. One of them, Ya, stepped closer to the wall. The shrine doctor gave us power, Kofi. Real power. Wealth that fills our hands, not empty promises from bones in the ground. Kofi didn't look up. He finished his prayer, his lips moving in the ancient words his grandmother had taught him. When he stood, his knees cracked. He was only 32, but poverty had aged him like old leather left in the sun. The ancestors provide in their time, Kofi said quietly, his voice steady despite the shame burning in his chest. Kwame spat on the ground. Your time ran out years ago, fool. Even your wife knows it. I see how thin she's become. How long before she leaves you for a man who can feed her? The word struck like a physical blow. Kofi's wife, Amma, was inside the hut, and he prayed she hadn't heard. She had stayed with him through everything, her faith as unshaken as his own, but he could see the pain in her eyes growing deeper each day. Go to your dark spirits, then, Kofi said, turning toward his small plot of land. But when they demand payment, remember, ancestors ask for respect. Demons ask for souls. Kwame's laughter followed him like smoke. We'll see who's right when the rains come, Kofi. We'll see whose fields overflow and whose turn to dust. Kofi walked to his farm, a small patch of land that sat at the edge of the village, near the sacred grove where no one else dared to plant. The soil between his fingers was dry, crumbling, lifeless. He had saved just enough seeds for one more planting. One more season. If this failed, he would have nothing left but his faith. And lately, even that felt like trying to hold water in his bare hands. The sickness came like a thief in the night. Kofi woke to find Amma burning with fever, her skin hot as sun-baked clay, her breath coming in shallow gasps. He ran through the village in the darkness, pounding on doors, begging for the herbalist, for anyone who knew the healing plants. But doors stayed shut. Windows remained dark. Please. Kofi's voice cracked as he stood in the center of the village square, the moon watching his desperation. My wife is dying. Someone, please. Chief Osei's compound gate opened. The chief himself stepped out, wrapped in expensive Kent cloth, a cigarette glowing between his fingers. Behind him, Kofi could see the shadows of women, the remnants of a feast, the comfortable waste of wealth. Kofi, the chief said, his voice smooth as palm oil. Still clinging to the old ways, I see. Still too proud to accept the new order. Please, my chief. Just the herbalist. I'll work for you, I'll. The herbalist works for me now, Chief Osei cut him off. And he serves those who serve the new spirits. Those who understand that tradition is just another word for foolishness. He took a long drag from his cigarette. But I'm not heartless, Kofi. Renounce your ancestors. Come to the shrine doctor tomorrow. Pledge yourself to the spirits that bring real power. Do this, and I'll send help for your wife. The world tilted. Kofi's knees hit the ground, his hands pressed flat against the earth. Everything in him wanted to scream yes, wanted to save Alma by any means necessary. But her voice echoed in his memory, from just 3 days ago when they'd sat together in the evening. Promise me, Kofi. If I die, you stay true. The ancestors are testing us. Don't fail them. Don't fail our children's children who will need to know the right path. Kofi's throat closed. I cannot. Chief Osei's laugh was cold. Then your wife's blood is on your hands, farmer. Not mine. The gate slammed shut. Kofi ran back to his hut, his feet pounding the path he knew by heart, his chest heaving with sobs he couldn't control. When he burst through the door, Alma's eyes were open, looking at him with such clarity it stopped his heart. Kofi, she whispered. Her hand found his. Did you stay true? He collapsed beside her, tears streaming down his face. Yes. Yes, I stayed true. She smiled. It was the most beautiful thing he'd ever seen. Good. Then. I am proud to be your wife. Her hand went slack in his. The sound that tore from Kofi's throat was not human. It was the cry of every ancestor who had ever lost what they loved, every person who had chosen right over easy, every soul who wondered if the old god still listened at all. He held her until dawn painted the sky pink and gold. The women came then, as tradition demanded, to prepare her body. They wept with him, but he heard their whispers, the ancestors have cursed him. This is what pride costs. He should have bent. He should have saved her. Kofi buried Alma at sunset, beside the baobab tree where they'd been married 12 years ago. He poured libations on her grave with water from the sacred well, spoke the prayers for the dead, and felt more alone than the last star in the morning sky. That night, he couldn't sleep. His hut was too empty, too quiet, too full of her absence. As the moon reached its peak, Kofi stood and walked out into the darkness. His feet carried him to the place he'd avoided since childhood, the sacred grove where the ancestors were said to walk when the veil was thin. Ancient Irako trees rose like pillars holding up the sky. Ferns grew thick between massive roots. The air tasted different here, older, watchful. Nananam, Kofi's voice broke the silence. He fell to his knees on the soft earth. I have nothing left. My wife is gone. My seed is almost finished. The village mocks me. Even children throw stones at my compound. His hands clawed at the ground. But I am still here. I am still yours. If you have abandoned me, tell me now. If this is punishment, let me know my crime. But if you still remember my name, if you remember how my grandmother kept your shrines, how my father poured libations even in drought, how Amma died with your name on her lips, then please. His voice dissolved into weeping. The grove was silent. Too silent. No cricket sang. No night birds called. Even the wind had stopped, as if the world was holding its breath. And in that impossible stillness, Kofi heard it. Footsteps. Not on earth. On air. Kofi's head snapped up, his heart hammering against his ribs. The moonlight filtering through the canopy had changed, taking on a golden quality that made the ferns glow like emeralds, the tree bark shine like polished bronze. 3 figures emerged from the shadows between the trees. They were old, impossibly old, but they moved with the grace of dancers. The woman in front wore white cloth that seemed woven from mist. Her eyes were ancient, but kind, and when she looked at Kofi, he felt seen in a way that made him want to both hide and run toward her. The 2 men flanking her wore the ceremonial dress of warriors from a time before memory, with amulets that caught the strange light and threw it back in colors Kofi had no names for. Kofi, son of Kojo, grandson of Akojua the Keeper, the woman's voice wrapped around him like his grandmother's arms. You have called, and we have answered. Kofi's mouth opened, but no sound came out. His limbs felt frozen, his mind unable to process what his eyes were seeing. The woman smiled. Do not fear, child. We are your blood. We are the ones you have honored when honor cost you everything. She moved closer, and Kofi could smell earth after rain, smoke from ancestral fires, the particular sweetness of ripe mangoes from his childhood. You have passed the test. Test. The word scraped out of Kofi's throat. My wife. Alma, she died. Was that a test? Pain flickered across the woman's ageless face. Death comes for all, Kofi. But how we die, and what we die for, that matters. Your wife is with us now. She rests in honor because she chose truth over comfort, faith over fear. The woman knelt before him, and suddenly Kofi understood, this was his grandmother, Akojua, or her mother, or her mother's mother. This was the line that had never broken, the chain that had held. She asked us to give you this. The woman held out her hands. In her palms lay seeds, but not ordinary seeds. These glowed with an inner light, pulsing gently like tiny hearts. Plant these in your field, his ancestor said. Water them with your tears and your sweat. Tend them as you have tended our memory. And know this, the land that receives them will never fail you. But the harvest they bring is not yours alone. It belongs to those who remember, to those who will remember, to the children not yet born who will need to know that the ancestors keep their promises. Kofi's hands trembled as he reached for the seeds. The moment his fingers touched them, warmth flooded through his body, not the heat of fever, but the warmth of sun on your back during planting season, of your mother's hand on your forehead when you were sick, of coming home. There is more you must know, one of the male ancestors spoke, his voice deep as drums. The famine that comes will test this village. The chief and those who follow him have made pacts with spirits that demand hunger, that feast on suffering. They grow rich while the land grows poor. But their time of reckoning approaches. The other warrior ancestor stepped forward. When your harvest comes, they will try to take it. They will use force, use lies, use the people's desperation against you. You must stand firm. We will be watching. We will be waiting. But why me? Kofi asked, his voice small. I'm nobody. Just a farmer who's lost everything. His grandmother's spirit smiled, and it was like sunrise after the longest night. You are not nobody, Kofi. You are the one who remembered when forgetting was easier. You are the one who poured libations when your belly was empty. You are the one who chose honor when it cost you your heart. She placed her hand over his chest. And you are the one we choose to show this village that the ancestors are not dead, not sleeping, not gone. We are here. We have always been here. We are waiting for those who remember to call our names. The golden light began to fade. Wait. Kofi called out. Will I see Amma again? His grandmother's voice came from everywhere and nowhere. When your work is done, when the people remember, when the land is healed, yes, child. You will see her again. She walks with us now. And she is so very proud of you. Then they were gone. Kofi knelt alone in the grove, the seeds warm in his hands, tears streaming down his face, but for the first time since Amma's death, they were not tears of despair. They were tears of hope. Kofi planted the seeds at dawn, his hands working the soil with reverence. Each seed went into the ground with a prayer, with Amma's name, with the names of every ancestor he could remember. As he worked, he didn't notice the sky changing, didn't see the clouds gathering in patterns that hadn't been seen in generations. But when he poured water on the last seed, the earth beneath his hands shifted. It was subtle at first, a warming, a softening, as if the ground was waking from a long sleep. Then the soil began to darken, enriching itself, transforming from pale dust to deep, fertile black right before his eyes. Kofi sat back on his heels, his breath catching. By the time the sun reached its peak, green shoots had pushed through the earth. By sunset, the shoots were seedlings. By the next morning, his small field was covered in crops that stood knee-high, their leaves a green so vibrant it hurt to look at them directly. The village woke to whispers. Have you seen Kofi's farm? Impossible. It must be trick. Or dark magic. Check for yourself if you don't believe me. By midday, a crowd had gathered at the edge of Kofi's land. People stood in stunned silence, staring at crops that should have taken months to grow, watching as the plants seemed to pulse with an inner light whenever the wind touched them. Kofi worked among the rows, his movements calm, his face peaceful. He could feel their stares, hear their whispers, but he kept working, kept tending, kept thanking the ancestors with every breath. An old woman from the village, grandmother Ya, pushed through the crowd. She was ancient, had lived through 3 chiefs, had seen droughts and floods and wars. When she reached the edge of the field, she fell to her knees. Nana Nam, she whispered, and her voice carried across the silent crowd. They have returned. They have not forgotten us. Others began to kneel. Not everyone, many still stood with arms crossed, doubt etched on their faces, but enough. Enough to make Kofi's heart swell with something that felt like vindication mixed with grief. Alma should have been here to see this. 3 months passed like a dream. Kofi's crops grew at an impossible rate, but they grew true, no disease touched them, no pests fed on them, every ear of corn was full, every cassava root was thick and perfect. When the time came for harvest, Kofi woke before dawn and stood at the edge of his field. Thank you, he said to the air, to the ancestors, to Alma wherever she walked now. This is not mine. This is ours. This is for the people who will remember. The harvest was more than his small plot should have yielded. More than made sense. Kofi's compound filled with baskets of grain, yams piled high as a man's chest, vegetables in such abundance he couldn't count them all. And Kofi shared. Every widow in the village received a basket. Every orphan got a sack of grain. The old people who sat in the sun with nowhere to go found food on their doorsteps. Kofi walked through the village with his harvest, and his face held no pride, no arrogance, only quiet peace. The ancestors provide, he would say when people tried to thank him. I am just the hands they use. But not everyone celebrated. In his compound, Chief Osei paced like a caged leopard, his expensive robes swishing with each furious turn. Around him sat the village elders, 3 men who had grown fat on the chief's generosity, who wore gold rings bought with money that should have gone to repair the school, the well, the clinic. This cannot continue, Osei hissed. The people are starting to listen to him. Starting to question us. Starting to remember the old ways. He slammed his hand on the table. I did not pay the shrine doctor everything I had to have some fool farmer undermine my authority. Kwabena, the eldest elder, leaned back in his chair. What do you propose, chief? The man has done nothing wrong. He farms his land, shares his harvest. If we move against him openly, the people will riot. Then we don't move openly, Osei said, his eyes glittering with malice. We plant doubts. We ask questions. Where did this power come from? Why does only his farm flourish? What if he's hoarding magic that could save us all? He smiled, and it was the smile of a snake. And when the famine comes, and it will come, the shrine doctor has promised it, when the people are desperate and starving, then we take what is his for the good of all. The elders nodded slowly, greed and fear warring on their faces. Outside, Kofi loaded the last of his harvest onto a cart, heading to deliver food to the school children. He hummed as he worked, an old song Amma used to sing, about planting in tears and reaping in joy. He didn't see the shadows gathering. But the ancestors did. And they were watching. The rains that should have come in the next season never arrived. Instead, the sky turned gray and stayed gray, day after day, like a bruise that wouldn't heal. Other farmers planted their seeds and watched them shrivel. The river that fed the village wells began to sink lower, lower, until rocks that hadn't seen sunlight in generations lay exposed and bleaching in the heat. Only Kofi's land stayed green. Water bubbled up from somewhere deep beneath his soil, keeping his crops healthy while everything around him turned to dust. His second harvest was even more abundant than his first, and again he shared it, walking through the village with baskets, feeding those who would accept, blessing those who wouldn't. But the whispers had started. Why only his farm? What deal did he make? My children are hungry, and he walks around playing saint. There's something unnatural about it. Maybe the chief is right to be concerned. Chief Osei moved through the village like smoke, never openly accusing, always questioning. He sat with people in the evening, sharing drinks he could afford and they couldn't, planting seeds more dangerous than any crop. I'm just concerned, he would say, his voice dripping with false care. Kofi is a good man, but this power, where does it come from? The ancestors, he says. But how do we know? What if he's made a deal with something else? What if his blessing is causing our curse? It was a clever lie. Clever because it took a truth: Kofi had power, others didn't, and twisted it just enough to make poison. Kofi felt the shift like a change in the wind. People stopped meeting his eyes. Children who used to wave at him ran away. When he tried to give grandmother Ya her weekly basket of food, she hesitated before taking it, fear flickering across her wrinkled face. What's wrong? Kofi asked gently. The old woman's hands shook. They say you've angered the ancestors. That you're keeping power for yourself. That if you truly cared, you would share the secret of your harvest, not just the food. Kofi's heart sank. I cannot share what is not mine to give, grandmother. The ancestors blessed me because I honored them. Anyone can honor them. Anyone can. But they don't listen to us. The old woman's voice cracked. We've tried, Kofi. We pray, we pour libations, we make offerings, but our fields stay dead. Why you? Why only you? She took the basket and shuffled away, and Kofi stood in the street feeling the weight of a question he didn't know how to answer. That night, he returned to the sacred grove. Nananam, he whispered into the darkness. They are turning against me. They think I'm cursed, or cursing them. How do I make them understand? The wind rustled the leaves, but no ancestors appeared. Instead, a different voice spoke from the shadows, warm, familiar, heartbreaking. Kofi. He spun around, tears already forming. Alma. She stood at the edge of the trees, not quite solid, not quite smoke, something in between. She was wearing the white cloth of the ancestors, and her face held the peace he'd always prayed she'd find. My love, she said, and her voice wrapped around him like coming home. You are not meant to make them understand. You are meant to stand firm. The test is not over. The ancestors are watching how you respond when the people you help turn against you, when doing right brings only pain, when faith costs more than you think you can pay. I don't know if I'm strong enough, Kofi admitted, his voice breaking. Alma's smile was sad and knowing. You are. Because you are not alone. We walk with you. Every ancestor who ever chose truth over comfort, honor over ease, we are here. She began to fade. And soon, very soon, everyone will see. The darkness will expose itself. Trust the ancestors. Trust yourself. Trust. She was gone. Kofi stood alone in the grove, but his chest felt fuller, his shoulders straighter. He could do this. He would do this. Even when the worst was yet to come. The drought deepened. By the 4th month without rain, the village looked like a skeleton of itself. The river dried to a trickle. Wells gave up muddy water that made children sick. Farms that had once fed hundreds now cracked under the merciless sun, growing nothing but dust and despair. People began to die. First the very old, then the very young. The clinic ran out of medicine. The herbalist ran out of plants to harvest because nothing grew. Mothers walked through the village with hollow eyes, their children's cries for food growing weaker each day. And still, only Kofi's land flourished. His third harvest came, and this time, Kofi gave everything. He kept only enough to survive, pouring the rest into the community. He set up a distribution point outside his compound, and people came, desperate, angry, ashamed, to take what they needed from the man they'd mocked. The man they now whispered was both their salvation and their curse. Chief Osei watched this from his compound window, his face twisted with rage. His own stores were running low. The shrine doctor had promised that the famine would make people dependent, would make them grateful, would solidify his power. Instead, they were turning to Kofi. Unacceptable. The chief called a village meeting in the square. Everyone came, hunger making them hope for answers, for solutions, for anything that would end the suffering. Chief Osei stood on the platform, dressed in his finest clothes, projecting strength even as his kingdom crumbled. "My people," he began, his voice carrying across the silent crowd. "We are dying. Our children are dying. And yet, one man's farm, just one, produces more food than all of ours combined." He let that sink in, watching faces turn toward Kofi, who stood at the back of the crowd, his expression calm. "Now, Kofi is generous," the chief continued. "He shares his harvest, and for that, we should be grateful. But I ask you, is it enough? Is it fair that one man holds the key to our survival? That he alone knows the secret that could save every farm, every family?" Murmurs rippled through the crowd. Kofi felt the shift, felt the desperation in the air turning sharp, turning dangerous. "What if," Chief Osei said slowly, "Kofi's blessing is actually our curse? What if the ancestors favor him so much that they've abandoned the rest of us? What if his good fortune is the reason for our suffering?" "That's not true," Kofi called out, pushing forward through the crowd. "The ancestors don't work that way. They don't punish the many for blessing the few." "Then why?" A woman's voice, raw with grief. Kofi recognized her, she'd buried her daughter just 2 days ago. "Why do your crops grow while my child starved? Why you, Kofi? What makes you so special?" The crowd pressed closer, their faces desperate, angry, afraid. Kofi felt his throat tighten. "I honored them," he said quietly. "When everyone else turned to dark spirits, I stayed true. I lost everything, my wife, my peace, my reputation, but I kept faith. The ancestors rewarded that. They can reward you too, if you—" "We don't have time for your sermons," a man shouted. "My family needs food now, not lessons about the old ways." Chief Osei stepped forward, his hand raised for silence. "Perhaps," he said, his voice oily smooth, "the solution is simple. Kofi's land clearly belongs to the ancestors, not to him. It produces for all, not for one. Therefore, I declare, for the good of the village, that Kofi's farm is now community property. He will continue to work it, but the harvest will be distributed by the elders, fairly, to all who need." The crowd roared approval. Hungry people didn't care about justice, they cared about survival. Kofi stood frozen, watching everything he'd built, everything the ancestors had given him, being taken by the very people he'd tried to help. "No," he said, but his voice was lost in the noise. "It's decided then," Chief Osei declared, triumph barely hidden on his face. "Tomorrow, we take possession of the sacred farm. For the good of all." That night, Kofi didn't sleep. He sat on his land, his hands in the soil, praying, weeping, trying to understand. "Is this the test?" he whispered to the darkness. "To have everything taken? To be blamed for trying to help?" The wind picked up, and in it, he heard Amma's voice one more time. "Stand firm, my love. Stand firm. The darkness is about to expose itself. They came at dawn, Chief Osei, his guards, the 3 elders, and half the village trailing behind like a funeral procession. Kofi stood at the edge of his farm, arms at his sides, face peaceful despite the storm in his chest. Stand aside, Kofi, Chief Osei commanded. This land serves the people now. This land already serves the people, Kofi replied quietly. I've given everything I've harvested. Everything. What more do you want? Control, the chief said, and for the first time, his mask slipped. The people need to know I provide for them, not you. They need to remember who leads this village. The ancestors lead this village, Kofi said. You just govern it. Or you're supposed to. Chief Osei's face darkened. Take him. The guards moved forward. Kofi didn't resist as they grabbed his arms, as they dragged him away from the field he'd tended with prayers and tears. The crowd watched, some with shame on their faces, others with relief, at least now they'd eat. Grandmother Ya pushed through the crowd, her ancient face wet with tears. This is wrong. Can't you all see? This is wrong. It's for the good of all, one of the elders said, but he wouldn't meet her eyes. They threw Kofi into a small hut at the edge of the village, the one used for storing tools. The door locked behind him. Through the cracks in the walls, he could see Chief Osei and the elders walking onto his land, their hands reaching for the crops, their faces eager. The moment the chief's fingers touched the first stalk of corn, it withered. The crowd gasped. Kofi pressed his face to the crack in the wall, watching as plant after plant died under the chief's touch, as if his very presence was poison to what the ancestors had blessed. No. Chief Osei roared. No, this is mine. This is. He grabbed another plant. It turned black and crumbled to dust. Everyone, he shouted. Everyone pick. The whole harvest, now, before it spoils. The crowd surged forward, desperate hands reaching, grabbing, pulling. But every crop they touched died instantly, withering like paper in flame, until Kofi's beautiful field was nothing but stalks of ash and memory. A woman fell to her knees, sobbing. What have we done? What have we done? Chief Osei spun toward the hut where Kofi was locked. This is your doing. You cursed it. You. I cursed nothing, Kofi's voice came through the wall, calm and clear. The ancestors gave the blessing. The ancestors took it back. You cannot steal what was never mine to give. The chief's face contorted with rage. Then you'll make it grow again. You'll work this land as my slave until it produces, or I'll. Or you'll what? Kofi asked. Kill me. Then you'll have nothing. The ancestors chose me. They can choose another, but they will never choose you. Chief Osei's hand went to the knife at his belt. The crowd fell silent, watching, waiting to see how far their leader would fall. My chief, one of the elders said nervously, perhaps we should. Silence. Osei screamed. His eyes were wild now, all pretense of wisdom and leadership stripped away, leaving only greed and desperation. This is my village. Mine. And if I can't have the blessed farm, then no one will. He pulled out his knife and raised it high. Burn it, he commanded his guards. Burn the land, burn the hut, burn everything. If Kofi won't serve me, he serves no one. The guards hesitated. Burning a man alive was one thing when you were angry. It was another when you had to look into his calm eyes, when you remembered he'd fed your children just yesterday, when you knew, deep in your bones, that something larger than all of you was watching. I said burn it, the chief screamed. And that's when the ground began to shake. The trembling started small, a vibration under their feet, barely noticeable. Then it grew, and grew, until people stumbled, grabbing each other for balance, until the chief's knife fell from his hand and stuck point down in the earth. The sky, gray for months, turned darker. But not with rain clouds, with something else. Something that made the air crackle, made hair stand up, made every person in that crowd remember stories they'd heard as children about the days when the gods walked among men. The door to Kofi's prison hut swung open on its own. He stepped out, and though he was the same man, thin from fasting, weathered from work, something in his bearing had changed. He stood like someone who knew he was not alone, like someone who could see what others couldn't. "Nananam," he whispered. "I'm ready." The wind picked up, swirling dust into patterns, and then they appeared. Not just 3 ancestors this time. Dozens. They materialized from the air itself, from the dust, from the very ground beneath the village. Old warriors in ceremonial dress, ancient queens in white cloth, wise elders with eyes that had seen centuries. They formed a circle around the crowd, and every person there, even Chief Osei, fell to their knees in terror and awe. The woman ancestor who had first appeared to Kofi, the one who was his grandmother or her mother's mother, stepped forward. When she spoke, her voice didn't just carry, it resonated in everyone's chest, in their bones, in their souls. "People of this village," she said, and there was sorrow in her ancient voice. "You have forgotten. You have turned from the path. But worse, you have blamed the faithful for your own unfaithfulness." She turned to Chief Osei, who was prostrate on the ground, trembling. "Stand," she commanded. The chief tried to resist, but his body obeyed anyway, pulled upright by invisible strings. His face was gray with terror. "You made a deal with the shrine doctor," the ancestor said. "It wasn't a question. You paid him with village money, with food meant for the clinic, with gold meant for wells and schools. You asked for power and wealth. And he gave it to you, but at what cost?" Chief Osei's mouth opened and closed, but no sound came out. Another ancestor stepped forward, a warrior with scars across his face and eyes like judgment itself. "The shrine doctor you paid served spirits of hunger, spirits of greed. To give you wealth, they had to take it from somewhere. The famine? That is the price of your power, chief. Every child who died, every family that starved, their suffering fed the dark spirits who made you rich." Gasps erupted from the crowd. People turned to look at their leader, seeing him clearly for the first time. "No," Chief Osei whispered. "No, I didn't know. He didn't tell me it would." "You didn't ask," the warrior ancestor cut him off. "You wanted power without price, wealth without work, respect without earning it. And you were willing to let your people suffer as long as you prospered." The chief fell to his knees again, this time in genuine remorse, or was it just fear? "Please, I'll fix it. I'll send the shrine doctor away, I'll." "It's too late for that," Kofi's grandmother ancestor said softly. "The damage is done. The pact is made. And now, payment comes due." She raised her hand, and the wind rose with it. Chief Osei's compound began to shake. The walls cracked. The roof tiles flew off. And inside, visible to everyone in the crowd, his wealth began to transform. Gold turned to sand. Fine cloth became cobwebs. The food stores he'd hoarded while others starved rotted instantly, filling the air with the stench of decay. Everything he'd gained through his dark pact dissolved like smoke, like it had never been real at all. The chief screamed, watching his power crumble, but the ancestors weren't done. "You will leave this village," the warrior ancestor declared. "You will wander, hungry, knowing what hunger feels like. You will beg for food, knowing how it feels to be denied. And you will carry a mark, so all who see you will know you as the chief who sold his people's suffering for gold that turned to dust." The chief's skin began to change, not dramatically, but enough. A pattern emerged on his forehead, like a brand, the symbol ancient priests had used for betrayer. It would never fade. Everyone he met for the rest of his life would know his shame. "Please," Osei wept. "Please, I'm sorry. I didn't mean." "You meant every bit of it," Kofi's grandmother ancestor said, and there was no cruelty in her voice, only truth. You chose this path. Now walk it to its end. The guards released Kofi immediately, backing away as if he might burn them. The elders who had supported the chief were also marked, not as severely, but enough. Their gold rings turned to copper, then to iron, then disappeared entirely. Their fine clothes became simple cloth. Then the ancestors turned to the village as a whole. You, the grandmother ancestor said, addressing everyone, allowed this to happen. You chose comfort over truth, you blamed the faithful for your own lack of faith, you turned on the one person who honored us when honor cost him everything. She gestured to Kofi, who stood silent, tears streaming down his face. This man lost his wife. He gave away his harvest. He stood alone while you mocked him, alone while you doubted him, alone while you tried to steal from him. And still, he fed you. Shame fell over the crowd like a blanket. People couldn't look at Kofi, couldn't look at each other. But, the grandmother ancestor's voice softened, the ancestors are not without mercy. You have been taught. You have seen. The question now is, will you remember? She walked to Kofi and placed her hand on his shoulder. Our faithful one, she said gently, your work here is not yet done. But it changes now. Are you willing? Kofi nodded, not trusting his voice. Then we restore the land. Not for one man, but for all who will honor us. Not for private wealth, but for communal blessing. Kofi will teach you the ways we require. He will lead you back to the path. And if you follow, truly follow, this village will never hunger again. She turned to Kofi. But you, beloved child, will walk between worlds now. You will be ours, even as you serve them. And when your work is complete, I'll see Amma, Kofi finished, his voice breaking. His grandmother ancestor smiled. You will see all of us, and we will welcome you home. The ancestral grandmother raised both hands to the sky, and the other spirits joined her, forming a circle of power that made the air itself shimmer. Kofi felt energy flowing through him, not his own, but channeled through him, like he was a riverbed and the ancestors were the river. Light poured from their upraised hands, golden and pure, and it flowed across the ruined field. Where it touched, dead crops dissolved into rich soil. Where it pooled, new seeds sprouted instantly, pushing through the earth with supernatural vigor. But it didn't stop at Kofi's field. The light spread like water, running through irrigation channels that didn't exist, touching every farm in the village, every patch of land that had withered under the drought. The ground darkened, enriched itself, and transformed from dust to fertile earth. Wells that had run dry began to bubble again. The river, nothing but cracked bed for months, filled with clear water that tasted sweet and clean. The people watched in stunned silence, seeing with their own eyes what had only lived in stories, the ancestors making the earth new, restoring what had been broken, healing what greed had destroyed. This is the final mercy, the warrior ancestor declared, his voice carrying across the transformed landscape. This is the last chance. The land is blessed again, but it requires maintenance. It requires honor. It requires that you remember. He turned to Chief Osei, who was gathering his few remaining possessions with shaking hands, preparing for exile. Go now. Your judgment has been spoken. If you ever return to this village, the earth itself will reject you. Your feet will find no purchase here. Your shadow will bring no shade. You are severed from this place, from these people, from the blessings you tried to own. The guards who had served him, who had dragged Kofi from his field, who had been prepared to burn him alive, they stepped back as their former chief walked past. No one stopped him. No one spoke. They just watched as he left the village square, heading toward the road that led to nowhere, his back bent with shame, his forehead marked forever. Grandmother Ya, who had been one of the few to defend Kofi throughout, stepped forward and knelt before the ancestors. Nana Nam, she said, her voice quavering with age and emotion, we have been foolish. We have been weak. Teach us. Show us the way back. One by one, others knelt. Not everyone, a few still stood with arms crossed, doubt and pride keeping them upright, but most. The weight of what they'd witnessed, what they'd almost done, what they'd been saved from, pressed them down like gravity. Kofi's grandmother ancestor gestured for them to rise. "The teaching begins now," she said. "And it begins with truth." She waved her hand, and the air in the center of the square shimmered. Images formed, like smoke given shape and color, showing the village its own history. There was Chief Osei, 2 years ago, walking into the shrine doctor's hut with bags of gold, gold that should have fixed the school roof, that should have bought medicine, that should have fed the hungry. The crowd watched him make his deal, watched the shrine doctor draw blood, watched dark spirits materialize and grin with too many teeth. Feed on their suffering, the shrine doctor instructed the spirits in the vision. Take from the many to give to the one. Make him rich, make him powerful, and in return, take what you need. The spirit spread out across the village in the vision, invisible to human eyes, settling like a film over the land, over the wells, over the womb of the earth itself. And wherever they touched, things began to die. The crowd watched themselves in the vision, going about their days, planting their crops, not knowing that the ground beneath their feet had been cursed by their own leader's greed. Then they saw Kofi. Saw him tending his wife through her final illness, saw him burying her with his own hands, saw him walk to the sacred grove and call out to the ancestors with a broken heart and unbroken faith. They saw what he'd seen, the 3 ancestors appearing, the gift of seeds, the promise and the warning. They saw his fear, his doubt, his choice to trust anyway. And they saw what happened every time he shared his harvest. Each basket of food he gave away glowed briefly in the vision, like a small light pushing back darkness. And wherever those lights landed, in the hands of widows, in the arms of orphans, in the bellies of the hungry, the dark spirits recoiled, unable to touch what had been blessed through generosity. "He fought our battle for us," a man whispered from the crowd. "While we doubted him, while we blamed him, he was the only thing standing between us and complete darkness." The vision faded. The ancestors stood in silence, letting the truth settle into hearts that had been closed by fear and desperation. "Now you know," the warrior ancestor said. "Now you understand. The choice is always before you, honor or greed, community or self, the ancestors or the darkness that promises easy wealth. Choose wisely. Choose with your eyes open. Because the ancestors can bless, but we will not force. We can teach, but we cannot make you learn. We can show the path, but you must walk it yourselves." Kofi's grandmother ancestor turned to him one last time. "You are released from farming alone, beloved. Your task now is to teach. To show them how to honor, how to remember, how to tend the blessings they've been given. Will you do this?" Kofi straightened his shoulders. "I will." "Then know this, Alma walks with you. She sees you. And in the quiet moments, at dawn and at dusk, you may hear her voice on the wind. She is proud of you, Kofi. We all are." The ancestors began to fade, their forms becoming translucent, then transparent, then gone. But before they disappeared completely, Kofi's grandmother ancestor whispered one more thing. "She waits for you. And when your time comes, when your work is finished, we will all be here to welcome you home. You have earned your rest, faithful one. But not yet. Not yet." Then the village square was silent except for the sound of water rushing back into the river, the sound of new leaves rustling in a wind that smelled like rain, the sound of people weeping, some with shame, some with relief, some with joy at being given another chance. Kofi stood in the center of it all, ordinary again, just a thin farmer with calloused hands and a peaceful face. But everyone there knew, they would never see him as ordinary again. They would see him as what he was, a man chosen, a man faithful, a man who had stood alone against darkness and won because he was never really alone at all. 1 year later, the village looked like a different place. The farms flourished, not with the supernatural abundance of Kofi's original blessed field, but with honest plenty that came from good soil, good water, and good work. The school had been rebuilt. The clinic had medicine. Children's laughter filled the streets again, their bellies full, their parents' eyes clear. Every week, the whole village gathered at the restored ancestral shrine for offerings and prayers. Not out of fear, but out of gratitude. Not because they had to, but because they wanted to remember, wanted to teach their children that there was a way to live that honored both the dead and the living, that brought blessing instead of curse. Kofi taught them everything. How to pour libations. How to remember the names of the ancestors. How to tend the land with respect instead of exploitation. How to share what they had with those who had nothing. Some still struggled with it. Change comes slowly to hearts hardened by years of taking the easy path. But most tried. Most learned. Most changed. And the land responded. On this particular morning, Kofi woke before dawn as he always did. He walked to his field, smaller now since he'd given much of it back to the community, and knelt in the soil. The earth was cool under his hands, dew glistening on new leaves, everything peaceful in that moment before sunrise. "Good morning, Nana Nam," he whispered. "Thank you for another day." The wind picked up gently, and in it, he heard her voice. Not imagination. Not memory. Alma, as real as the earth beneath him, as present as the air around him. "Good morning, my love." Kofi closed his eyes, smiling. This happened sometimes, at dawn or dusk, when the world was quiet and the veil was thin. He could hear her, could almost feel her hand on his shoulder, could know with absolute certainty that death had not ended what they shared. "The harvest will be good this year," he told her. "Because you taught them well," she replied, her voice warm with pride. "The village has changed, Kofi. The ancestors are pleased." "Are you pleased?" he asked quietly. "I am so proud of you," Alma said. "So very proud. You stayed true when it would have been easier to break. You loved when it would have been easier to hate. You gave when it would have been easier to keep. And now look what your faithfulness has grown." Kofi opened his eyes and looked out over the village. Smoke from morning fires rising. People beginning to stir. The sound of children waking, animals being tended, life returning to normal after being saved from the brink. "It wasn't just me," Kofi said. "It was you. The ancestors. Everyone who chose to remember." "Yes," Alma agreed. "But it started with you. One person, choosing right when everyone else chose wrong. That's all it takes, Kofi. That's all it ever takes." "Will I see you again today?" he asked, already knowing the answer. "Tomorrow morning," she promised. "And the morning after that. And the morning after that. Until my work is done," Kofi finished. "Until I can come home." "Until you can come home," Alma confirmed, and her voice was filled with love and longing and patience. "We'll wait for you, my love. We'll all wait for you." The wind died down. The presence faded. But Kofi's chest felt full, his heart at peace. He stood and walked back toward his compound, where grandmother Ye was already waiting with 3 children she'd brought to learn about planting ceremonies. "Teacher Kofi," the children called out, running to him with the enthusiasm of the young who don't yet understand the weight of the title they're using. "Good morning, little ones," Kofi said, his face creasing into a smile. "Ready to learn about the ancestors?" "Yes," they chorused. And so the teaching began again, as it had every day for the past year, as it would every day for the years to come. Kofi showing small hands how to pour water on the ground while speaking words of respect. Explaining why we remember the dead, why we honor the old ways, why we share what we have instead of hoarding it. The children listened with the seriousness of those who've heard stories from their parents about the famine, about the chief who fell, about the farmer who stood alone and saved them all. By the time the sun had fully risen, the whole village was awake. Farmers headed to fields that were generous because they were tended with gratitude. The river ran clear because no dark spirits poisoned its source. The market buzzed with trade and laughter because people had something to trade, something to laugh about. And through it all, Kofi moved like a quiet blessing, teaching, helping, reminding, always pointing back to the ancestors who had saved them, never claiming credit for himself. The ancestors provide, he would say whenever someone tried to thank him. I just help you remember how to receive. As the day ended and the sun began to set, Kofi stood at the ancestral shrine in the village square. The restored shrine was beautiful now, clay pots filled with fresh flowers, incense burning, offerings of food and drink arranged with care. Grandmother Ya joined him, her old bones settling down with a sigh. They stood together in companionable silence, watching the sunset paint the sky in colors that spoke of peace, of promises kept, of faith rewarded. Will you tell them the story again tonight? She asked. Kofi smiled. Which story, grandmother? You know which one, she said. The young people need to hear it. They need to know what almost happened here, what was lost, what was saved. They need to remember that the choices we make matter, that the ancestors are watching, that one person's faithfulness can change everything. I'll tell it, Kofi promised. And he did. That night, as the village gathered around a fire in the square, Kofi told the story of the famine and the farmer, of the chief who fell and the ancestors who rose, of the wife who died with honor and the husband who lived with purpose. He told it simply, honestly, without making himself the hero, always pointing to the greater truth beneath the tale. The lesson, Kofi said as he finished, his voice carrying across the rapt crowd, is not that I'm special. The lesson is that faithfulness matters. Honor matters. Remembering matters. When we choose the hard right over the easy wrong, when we stay true even when staying true costs us everything, when we honor the ancestors and trust their timing, that's when blessings flow. Not because we deserve them, but because we've made ourselves ready to receive them. He paused, looking around at the faces in the firelight, young and old, those who doubted him and those who believed, all of them here now, learning together, growing together. The ancestors are not far away, Kofi continued. They're not dead, not gone, not powerless. They walk with us. They see us. They remember our names and wait for us to remember theirs. And when we do, when we honor them with our lives, not just our words, they answer. They guide. They protect. They provide. He stood, brushing dust from his simple clothes. That's the story. That's the truth. Remember it. Live it. Teach it to your children. Because the day you forget is the day you invite the darkness back in. And we've seen what darkness costs. We remember, the crowd called back, a tradition that had started in the month since the ancestors' judgment. We remember. Kofi nodded, satisfied, and walked back toward his compound. Tomorrow he would wake before dawn, would kneel in his field, would hear Amma's voice on the wind. Tomorrow he would teach more children, help more farmers, keep the memory alive in every small action and every quiet prayer. Tomorrow, and tomorrow, and tomorrow, until the work was done, until his time came, until he could go home to the ones who waited. But tonight, he was content. Tonight, under a sky full of stars, in a village that had learned to remember, Kofi lay down to sleep with a peaceful heart. The ancestors were watching. Amma was waiting. And all was well. The moral. The ancestors honor those who honor them. Tradition is not weakness, it is wisdom passed down through generations. Hard work, respect, and faithfulness bring blessings that greed can never steal and darkness can never destroy. When one person stands firm in truth, even when standing alone, they become a light that pushes back the darkness for everyone. Remember the old ways. Honor those who came before. Share what you have. And trust that when you stay faithful, even when faithfulness costs you everything, the ancestors are watching, and they will answer. If this story touched your heart, if it reminded you of truths you needed to hear, don't let it end here. Subscribe to FREESIDE Tales so you never miss another story of ancestors, honor, courage, and the wisdom of our people. Hit that like button if this spoke to your soul. And come back, because we have more stories to tell, more lessons to share, more truths that our ancestors want us to remember. The stories continue. The ancestors are still speaking. Will you listen? Welcome to FREESIDE Tales, where tradition meets truth, and every story carries the wisdom of those who walked before us.